Okay, I'm just going to start. And good afternoon. So I'm going to share a briefing on the recently completed State Center Vision and Market Study. I'm just going to begin with some background. The state, at the request of Senator Hayes, provided the department with funding to complete a study of the State Center site following the previous state administration's intent to move state employees from the complex to various locations throughout downtown. And hand that property over to the city. So through a competitive RFP process, the department selected a team led by Gensler. It included RCL Co., which is a real estate consulting firm, Mahan Reichel, landscape architects, and K. Dixon Architecture. Tariq Bolden and myself were the department staffing this and assisting the consultant team. And then just what we did, some outreach, including, so over the course of the 6 months, the department met with the community several times, including community open house in February of this year, stakeholder meetings with specific institutional stakeholders, a virtual community meeting in June of 2024, and attendance at specific community meetings, which we opened up to all impacted communities, of which only Bolton Hill and Mount Vernon Belvedere took us up. So some additional background. The complex began development in 1954 as an urban renewal project that included demolition of a portion of this existing row house community. In 2004, the state began the redevelopment process with the intention that the new development would rehouse state agencies that were working there. So in 2016, this redevelopment effort was canceled by the state. And in 2021, the intent to relocate State Center employees and transfer the site to the city was announced. So the original development plan, conceived between 2005 and 2008, included over 2 million square feet of office space, 1/4 of which would be occupied by state agencies. Other major uses included 2,000 residential uses, primarily consisting of rental apartments, as well as over 300,000 square feet of retail and a 50,000 square foot charter school. The retail planned on site included a 60,000 square foot grocery store, which was planned to occupy the 5th Regiment Armory. And while it's generally agreed that this building could greatly add to the redevelopment potential, it is currently not included in the plan to transfer to the city of Baltimore, and it would remain the city site for the State Armory. Or State National Guard, sorry. Okay, so now I'm jumping into the actual study that was completed by the consultants. The charge to the consultants. So the goal of the study was to create a vision for the site as a transit-oriented development site and an anchor for this critical part of Baltimore based on current and projected market conditions. They were asked to create a conceptual and aspirational pre-development plan taking into consideration the assets in the vicinity, factors such as economic development initiatives, including the work of the Frederick Douglass Tunnel and Penn Station. And we also asked them to address the possible future redevelopment of the adjacent McCullough homes with mixed income housing within a to be defined catchment area that could be included in the site. Kind of like we were looking at choice neighborhoods, but also just kind of a choice neighborhood-esque style mixed income community. So at PSO, what the choice neighborhoods does is it relocates those HABC units within mixed income communities to create more stability and greater community benefits. So this study is intended to be used to inform conversations between the city and the state regarding the transfer of the site. And it's intended to be used to guide the city, state, and any future developer on the redevelopment of the site. So it doesn't have a final answer to saying this is what should happen here. It has options, and it has this, it's really a study. It's providing lots of information that can be used by the state, by the city, by a developer, as we're looking to redevelop this site and the adjacent McCullough homes.
Okay,
Yeah.
quick, was this commissioned by the city?
Yes, so we got state funding, and the department was in charge of this.
Figure out who was behind it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the Senator Hayes got us funding for this. So the project team identified these 7 key design drivers at the outset of the study that kind of centered everything. Everything else that we're going to talk about you could trace back to one of these key design drivers. So they include, centering transit, creating a vibrant mixed-income community, reconnecting the site to the surrounding neighborhoods and city grid, creating density, centering sustainability by prioritizing adaptation, reducing the urban heat island effect through well-designed public space, and providing a variety of options. So diving into one of the key design drivers, State Center is not only a crucial intra-city connection point between MTA Metrolink, light rail, and bus systems within Baltimore, but it's also an intercity transportation hub located near Baltimore Penn Station and broader regional connectivity through the Northeast Corridor. So this connectivity should be met with dense urban growth to capitalize on this unique opportunity within the city. And then some of the context. So the next few slides are just going to be basic context. You guys are all probably very familiar with this. And the document itself has much more information. So there's a link to it on the Wix site. So some of the context shows what we already know, that State Center sits at the nexus of several communities between residential neighborhoods to the west, which on this map and several others will be up, and more downtown commercial space to the east. It's also surrounded by a variety of institutional and community stakeholders. So this includes 3 of the 4 city arts districts. So we got the Black Arts District, Bromo Arts District, and Station North Arts District, a number of universities, as well as other critical institutional stakeholders. Okay, so moving on to the market study. First, a focus on the housing market. RCLCO found that moderately priced new rental apartments targeted towards younger renters will serve the needs of local households, help the subject site compete with an active market, and be met with strong demand. And though they may not represent the highest and best use from a value and density perspective, for sale townhomes, which are also expected to see strong demand, and that can help generate some initial activity on the site. Allow for my more diverse residential base and create cohesion with the surrounding neighborhood, which has a large amount of for sale residential. Significant demand, there's also significant demand, for affordable rental housing. Hold on, sorry, my notes. Especially for smaller households. So affordable housing for smaller households is also important. This suggests that allocating a subset of the rental apartments on site as affordable would align with the needs of the market. Okay. So just kind of some supportive information for that analysis. These are showing competitive nodes within the vicinity. So you can see while competitive nodes exist elsewhere, State Center could introduce mixed-use development to an underserved area in Baltimore. And then additional information on the rental apartment supply, just that there's limited new product in the primary market area in the last few years. So communities in the competitive set are well occupied. So if you look at this, they looked at 10, they looked at many more, but there are 10 selected here in this table that all have over 90% occupancy, and they're scattered around the site. Communities in the southern half of downtown and Feta Hill achieve the highest rents, unsurprisingly to us familiar with the city, and tend to be larger in scale, while communities closer to the site are smaller and more boutique offerings. So the Jordan and the Nelson Cole apartments are both located within walking distance of State Center. Despite convenient transit access, these properties are positioned at a discount to more centrally located communities. So just kind of a good information about what's going on in the rental market. Additionally, these pie charts show absorption potential by income, life stage, age, and unit type. So again, these are kind of snapshots, and there's way more information in the actual document itself, but wanted to share some of it with you. You can see, by income, it's quite mixed. There is absorption potential for a wide variety of incomes. By age, it's definitely centered toward a younger group. By unit type, kind of evenly mixed between studios, 1 bedroom and 2 bedrooms. And by life stage, again, we're seeing that younger professional. Okay, jumping to the retail market. State Center could serve an existing unmet need for retail within the immediate neighborhood. While the site's transit-oriented location can unlock a broader opportunity for more diverse retail or a unique anchor tenant over time, potentially. And the site's most compelling initial market opportunity is neighborhood-serving retail, including grocery services and restaurants. These retailers would serve as a critical element drawing activity to the site and beginning to link to the surrounding communities. So that's with the caveat of understanding retail context. So this isn't happening outside of everything else. So there is anticipated retail and housing development within the area. There's a proposed new grocery store at Reservoir Square, significant investment at the Pennsylvania Avenue Market, mixed-use development at 50 West Oliver, and affordable housing with limited retail at 1512 Utah. And these are just a sampling of some of the projects that we're seeing in the immediate vicinity, and we need to be aware of as we're looking at State Center. And then lastly, for the market study is looking at office, hotel, and institutional. No surprise, not a strong office market at the moment, though there is moderate strength for life science and wet lab space, but that would need to be designed with a specific tenant in mind. So likely wouldn't be built unless there was somebody asking for it. The site's regional access to Penn Station and local connectivity via mass transit all present compelling cases for the site's ability to get that anchor institution. That would be in a longer term opportunity. So onto the site and the existing buildings. So there are 4 existing buildings. They're shown here in yellow. They're located within a sea of parking lots. And the Armory is shown in green. Again, it's not currently included as part of the site, though we are advocating for it to be. The project team completed an analysis of the existing buildings, looking at their floor plates, location, walkability, relating to mass transit. And based on this analysis, 3 of the buildings, the 201 West Preston, 301 West Preston, and 300 West Preston were found to be viable for reuse. Only the building at 1100 North Utah had a score low enough to not consider reuse. Additionally, that location, really close to the residential community, was less desirable to have multifamily that close to along Utah. Yeah.
Do you have any idea what differentiated 1100 North Utah versus 301 West Preston? Because it looks like the scores were pretty close, but was there something that...
I think it was the location along, so this one is much closer to the lower scale residential community. And the idea was to maintain kind of Utah Street as a greening corridor with that lower density, which we'll get into.
It also looks like there's something with the floor plate.
Yeah.
At least able to convert.
Mm-hmm.
This is at 3 and the other ones are 5 or 6 for 300 West Preston. So something, floor to floor height or something in there, column spacing, whatever is screwing it up.
But you're right, I mean, 76 versus 79, so it's not like they were too crazy. So these are the options that were presented, and I'll go over them in more detail. But basically, there were 4 main options. The top left is adapt, where you maintain those 3 buildings that were seen as able to be reused, and then add new multifamily as well as the new row houses, as we discussed. The one to the upper right is blend, where you maintain most of the existing buildings with some minor demolition or some limited demolition, so 1 building would be demolished. Skin those, and then do new multifamily and new townhouses. Then there's the reimagine, which is full demolition and new construction. And then City Field option, which is kind of a reimagined City Field, so it would be full demolition, and then have this large-scale field there. This would only be likely if there was a partner who wanted this. So say UB or some other large-scale institutional group wanted to see this, that would probably be the only case that we could move forward with a City Field option.
So you've included in these options all of the McCullough homes?
What?
No.
Yes, except for the RAD. So
I mean, this, from here on is McCullough, right?
yes.
Yes. Okay.
What you can see in the mid-rise that's grayed out, those are the RAD units that are within McCullough.
No, wait, 1 second.
From here on.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep. And then this is the mid-rise that you're talking about.
yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Those have been renovated recently.
What? Jesus. Sorry.
What's that flat green square in the center of it all?
Proposed green space.
Open space?
Yeah, proposed open green space.
And then you got a big park down here.
That's the City Field that would only be part of, if there was an institution, say UB came to us and said, we want to have a city field or a large field for sports at UB, which isn't going to happen, but this could be an option, I'd be happy to be proven wrong.
Yeah.
Sports. Yeah, cool. That was something the community identified.
Yeah. Okay, so now I'm going to go into them all, and you can see them a little bit more close up. So this is the adapt scenario. And you can see, so the outlines show what is State Center and what is McCullough Homes. So the darker outline is State Center with dashed, and then the slightly lighter one is McCullough. And this would be retaining all the buildings except for that 1100 North Utah, and modifying them, reskinning them. The G in pink shows the grocery store. The yellow is multifamily. The green is for sale townhouse. Blue is office. So you can kind of see how they've organized the site. And then just to talk about what it would mean. So in the adapt scenario where we're reutilizing these buildings, which may not be people's favorite buildings, the brutalist style isn't many people's cup of tea, they could be reskinned. And so the idea is that there'd be some limited demolition as necessary to make them viable for reuse, and then they'd be reskinned to make them more attractive. But it would still be likely fairly cost effective rather than demolition and new construction. There'd be no demolition or limited to demolition, and it would probably be faster to market as well. So the blend scenario maintains 2 of the buildings. So in here you can see, let's see if I can get it to work. This building would be retained, and this one would be retained, and this would be new construction. In this scenario, they have a standalone new build grocery store, that's the G, which is probably the most, a grocery store would like that the best, but it is a little bit more risky from a reuse potential because that's a purpose-built grocery store. Oh, hold on. I apologize, this is the reimagine.
Underground garage at some point.
Yeah, so one thing to note is there is a very large underground garage. It has 600 parking spots underneath this area. It's like somewhat jointly below both. And so the idea would also be to reuse, to maintain the use of that for the parking, especially if we're considering, we're removing all of the surface parking on the site.
For all of the options, you're reusing the existing garage.
I think for the demo option, we would not be, based off of, so for the reimagine, it would be fully demolished. And I apologize, I didn't change the title on this one, so it should say reimagine. So there's this full demolition, and you can see how now a grocery store is integrated. And some of the row homes, because we have that extra density to the north, some of the row homes move further north, which is to the right on the slide. And yeah, just kind of changes things a little bit. And then so for again, the reimagined city field. So here you get that even more density on these two parcels closest to MLK because you're having the field where adjacent to the armory. Okay, so those are those options, but I'm then going to go through what this means for the streets real fast. So the team identified the streets in various ways. So A was the Preston Festival Street, and this is the area in State Center proper along Preston. So it's just from MLK to Utah. Preston Main Street, which is going into the residential community, so south of Utah. C, Utah Place Linear Park, so that's just Utah through the site. D is MLK and Dolphin, which would be seen as multimodal transit roads. E is the neighborhood streets that would continue through the site. F, which is these dotted through Preston Square, would be walking alleys, special connections for pedestrian experiences, and then service alleys. So I'm going to just go through some of these. The idea here for Preston Street, you'd have this Festival Street and the Main Street, and here's some of the current conditions. And what would that look like here? So the connections between the bus, the metro, the light rail, Penn Station, and where would these green spaces be? So it's an archipelago of open spaces that continue along Preston Street as like the main connection. For the different design options, here's how it could kind of grow and shift based off of the proposed buildings. So you can see where the grocery store is, how this relates to green spaces, where the metro is, and then the little green space along MLK. And then a study in perspective of what this would look like looking north on Preston. And this is here, zooming into the cross-section of Utah and Preston. So in the drawing, Utah is up and down, and Preston continues horizontally, kind of showing what that would look like. And I'll get into some more stuff. And here's the intersection at MLK showing a better pedestrian connection to harness the connection to Penn Station. Okay, and then Utah Street, again, folks are probably very familiar with Utah Place. It becomes kind of a really sad dead zone through State Center and then continues through downtown. And so, it's seeing a connection, a green corridor between Druid Hill Park and the Bromo Arts District, and an enhancement of this mass transit connection. And so here's how it would be perceived for these various options. It doesn't really change too much, except that if it becomes more residential, that does change the flavor or more lower scale residential, changes kind of how you perceive it. And so here is a view looking north of a potential. And then looking at MLK, North Howard Street, and Dolphin. So these are really problematic. We know that they divide communities, and we need to have ways for people to be able to get across them. But they are also really, MLK specifically, is a really important connection. So kind of downscaling Dolphin Street, making it useful space for bus. When we talk to MTA, they need a spot for like their bus drivers to go to the bathroom and pause the buses for a little bit. And Dolphin is a great location for that. And then you can see at MLK these connections getting across, and I'll go into those in a little bit more detail. So here you can see what is probably one of the most complicated intersections in the city, right? We all hate it. So this is their take on it. Obviously, this is a study. This is not a final design. There needs to be a lot more work here, but this is an idea to give developers as they move forward. And so here you can see easy pedestrian access. We also talked to the hospital, and they really need ambulances to be able to turn south into the hospital from MLK. And so this breaks up the barrier, the median barrier to allow that to happen. Were you going to say something, Eric? No.
Just to echo your frustration with that intersection, and not only is it, not, it's a barrier, it's not pedestrian friendly. There was recently the bike lane improvements, but it's still sort of
Still a
a
mess.
cluster. And this intersection causes traffic to back up down MLK all the way to Route 40. So my point is, I hope that we're looking at this from a DOT perspective and not just letting a potential developer kind of lead.
I think that's what the study can hopefully be useful in, is when DOT was in on these conversations, we met with MTA, and I think this could hopefully be that opening conversation, right? We want to own this, what happens to MLK, because we know how important it is. Okay, so that's basically it. So what's next? So the last agency is scheduled to vacate Site Center at the end of 2026. Several agencies do not currently have move dates, and I will say that date keeps shifting. Every time we talk to state DGS, they have a new date for us. The city and state must agree to terms of any transfer of ownership of the State Center site. That conversation has not yet happened. It's also important to know that that initial idea was the previous state administration. So conversations need to happen with the current governor's administration about what this process is going to look like, how they want it to be handled. But our goal at the city level is to limit the time that the site will remain vacant. And we would hope to issue an RFP prior to the last state agency leaving the site, whether it's us that issues the RFP, the state, who knows what, yeah. And so one of the items that Chris mentioned earlier that we'd like to move forward with is that engineering study of the existing buildings to make sure that, Gensler completed this and they walked the buildings, but they did not do an in-depth engineering study of the buildings for reuse. And so we need that to be done to better understand any terms that there might be with a developer, with the state, et cetera.
Including the garage.
Yeah, the garage is a big one. Okay, any questions? That's it.
Okay. Yeah, I've got a bunch, so let's start off with Commissioner Allen. It's good to see you.
I came in at the very end, so as much as I saw, actually, I worked there for a long time, in Maryland Department of Planning. So you, pardon me, I also have a mouthful. My mother would not be pleased. I came in at the end, so pardon me for that. But I was saying, I worked there for a time for the Maryland Department of Planning, and you may have covered this, but what's determining where the agencies that are presently there are going?
I think that's just DGS and where space is available. Chris, you need further information?
DGS has to move all the agencies into the downtown core, negotiate all those leases and improvements, and they're behind.
So a bunch have
It looks
happened,
they're
like,
about 2 years behind.
yeah, the comptroller's office kind of made a big deal about moving into their office downtown, which was great. But like the health department is kind of dragging their heels. So like every department's a little bit different.
Making it even harder.
Thank you, I was just very interested in that. Great presentation, what I saw, but I know the rest of it had to be too.
I'd like to welcome our newest commissioner, Commissioner Curtis, a representative from the Department of Public Works. Welcome. Might you have any questions for Caitlin on this?
Thank you.
Vice Chair Stevenson.
No questions, just to comment, this is really great, encouraging. I'm glad that the department's being proactive about this situation because it's really important to the West Side communities. And I read the full, or at least most of it. There's some, there's a tone of realism and like some tempered expectations around attracting an anchor tenant and, some sort of extended timelines. And while I appreciate, again, the realism and that may be the current state of the market, I hope that something like this can sort of be a catalyst and that we can, lead to attract, whether it's an anchor tenant or a site developer or something, And this would be a great tool to do that as opposed to just waiting 15 years.
Deputy Mayor Williams, questions for Caitlin?
No questions, but this really is great, good work with the consultant and you all to make this happen. I've been skeptical in some studies, but it's really deeply thought through, and I appreciate the work that went into this.
Thanks,
Commissioner
Caitlin.
Jolen.
Oh, thank you. Love the slide for the traffic. That's one I was personally really interested in. So I'm wondering if that's going to be, maybe you don't know, but that intersection was even more terrifying than the one we currently traverse. So wondering how that's going to look and feel in the future if we're like, no, everybody just take the train, we don't care.
I think that there's just a lot of unknowns, right? So with MTAs, we know that they've received a grant for new rail cars for the light rail. But that grant does not extend to the rails themselves or any relocation of them, or looking at it to see should there be different stops, right? In talking to the University of Maryland Medical System, we realized they have their own bus that gets people from their downtown campus to their midtown campus instead of utilizing the light rail, which is silly, but that's because there's no stop adjacent to their midtown campus. So there is, I think, a lot of bigger items that need to be fleshed out, light rail being one of them. But no, I think this is more of a starting point for a conversation rather than an end point of a conversation.
Commissioner Horn.
Just a couple questions. First is, how many units are in McCullough?
We just looked it up. I believe it is around 550.
550. And is that, so is the plan that once the next time a choice neighborhood comes into play, that might be proposed?
So HABC has a kind of next, like a list of different projects that they'd like to see pursue the choice grant. And at this point, McCullough is not in their list. So we are pursuing other alternatives that would mimic a choice neighborhood idea without having to go after that grant funding. And so I think, Chris, Tariq and I have talked about this, and I think we've got some good ideas that we're gonna bring to HABC, to the mayor's office, and then to the state to see how we can keep this moving forward with, and even if we were going after choice, those are, it would be like 5 years basically before they Poe first and then Cherry Hill and then this, and it would just be too long. State Center can't wait that long. So I think we're pursuing alternatives that might be more, like we might just have to come up with some ideas about how this can move forward without that. But the idea would be that it would be similar, where you would have relocation of those HABC units within a mixed income community +1. So right now for choice neighborhoods, for Perkins, they do replacement units +1, and then you can have affordable and market rate as well.
Forgive me for jumping in at a turn, but as we consider that, can we make sure there's at least a conversation about phasing?
Yeah, that is exactly what we're thinking about.
So
it would be like
that
a
folks
portion.
can be relocated first instead of expecting people to come back years later?
So I think the idea that we want to go run with is build something, relocate a portion. Build something, relocate a portion. So we would not demolish all. Again, this is we haven't gone to.
As long as it's being talked about, at least.
This is a concept, not
Yeah.
the design development package.
So it leads into my other question, just about community engagement. And so what's the plans to either re-engage community, or when does that start? And really, what's the pulse of community in terms of this project?
Yeah, so I think the broader community is very invested in this. They were brokenhearted when the former development was stopped previously. And so when we met with them over this process, there was a lot of, well, we already did this. Why aren't you using what we did before? And we said, the answer to that is we are, but it's a very different, times are different. That was gonna be 2 million square feet of office space with the state agencies all going back. We can't replicate what that was because it's no longer viable. And we need to rethink it. We can utilize what was in there to the best of our ability, But we also have new residents. We have folks that have moved away. Priorities may have shifted. So we needed to do this first step. And then anything that else that happens has to have that robust community outreach and community input. And so what we heard from folks is they wanted us to pay attention to what was done previously because they felt connected to that. And they wanted to make sure that anything that happens integrates the surrounding communities. They want this to be not for new residents, but for the residents who live there now. And they could welcome new residents to it, but it needs to be something that everybody in the surrounding communities can utilize. So we worked, that is centered in the study. But again, what we did is a study. It is not a development plan. And so we just need to maintain that focus as movement, however it goes forward, moves.
Thank you.
Commissioner McCoach.
Yep, great plan. Quite a read, too. You get into the back of the documents. Okay. I have to say, it's really good for Plain Park to be back in the business of planning the city. And we've been doing more of that in recent years, but for a long time, we didn't.
Yeah.
For a long time, we would wait for a developer to show up with a development plan. In fact, that's what happened at Harbor Place. And one wishes that we could have had this kind of foundation for our inner harbor, right? So, but the thing is, there's no developer here. And anybody that does these things knows that as soon as a developer shows up, everything you've done, there's some chance that it's discarded.
Yeah.
It's just how it is. I mean, look at all along the inner harbor, that was the case. So I wonder how much of these important conclusions that you've arrived at, which are good and sound, should be prescriptive. For instance, the discussion about community engagement.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about next steps here, having done this study, how can you make it stick?
That is a great point. And we've also been thinking about that when it comes to demolition, right? Mm-hmm. So in talking with the community, when they voted, we had that January 4th meeting, they voted on which option they preferred. Mm-hmm. They overwhelmingly preferred the blend option. Mm-hmm. And I prefer it too, to be honest, because it's going to be faster. It's going to be cheaper. We don't want this site to be demolished and then someone pull. We've seen that happen too many times. What we have been talking about is what could an agreement be. So we don't even own this property yet, right? So we as a city, we don't really have anything, any mechanism to force someone to do something, but in our conversations with the state, I think it's really critical that we outline what an MOU might be between a developer and the state or city. Mm-hmm. What, it's state-owned right now, which means that they don't have to follow a lot of the city review processes. Mm-hmm. And if they sell it directly to a developer rather than it going through the city, what does that mean for us? So an MOU should include to make sure they go through UDEP, they go through subdivision requirements, all these things that the state at the moment doesn't have to do for state-owned property. So those are the kinds of things we're paying attention to. Definitely community engagement, making some kind of requirements in there. But again, at this point, these are all suggestions that we'll be making to the state until some kind of agreement happens.
Well, this has great value for whomever pursues it.
Yeah.
And frankly, your conclusions could find a great home in the RFP selection criteria. If you got 3 teams, who's closest to aligning themselves with the goals of the city?
Yeah.
So, think hard about this because we should do more of this.
Yeah, no, I think we agree with you.
So, a couple of suggestions. I think that it should be absolutely imperative that the state transfer this to the city and that the city's in charge of this so that it is required to go through our process. Once that happens, though, I think in the disposition from the state to the city, I think you should absolutely be talking about a monthly maintenance budget so that these buildings don't fall in disrepair if this process is extended out to infinity, because then the blend option automatically becomes the demolition option, which we've seen because we can't maintain our existing buildings. So there should absolutely be a payment in there. And then I would suggest you think now of every possible scenario for the RFP and eliminate as many contingencies as you possibly can. Do a complete title package, do an Alta survey, do all of the things that come along with the disposition of property from one property owner to another. You got great legal counsel. They can lay out all the things get all those done to minimize the RFP time. Because the one thing that's absolutely imperative from the private sector is the downtime, the cost to carry. So from the time they win an RFP to the time they get the property, they have to reserve that capital for that acquisition. They don't have so much patience. At some point, they just say, forget it, I'm done. I got to deploy that capital to make money for my investors and stuff. So take out as many contingencies as you possibly can. I think that if the city controls the property, then it's just like any other land sale. You can put very specific things in there. This is exactly what we want. Just understand and expect that by saying that, you're impacting value.
Yeah.
And somebody may come back and say, I'll do all the things you want, but I can't pay for anything for the land. So if you really want it, that's great, but you don't get any money. It's just you're going to get the tax rolls once it's developed and so on and so forth. But you can write any contract any way you want it and see what's acceptable. But thank you very much for a great presentation.